are listening to the 4-7 Podcast, the podcast where two normal guys interview and reminisce about their favorite Christian artists from the 90s and today. Hey guys, Michael David here. Just want to say a quick hello to you guys. We are the 4-7 Podcast. You have me, Michael David. You have RJ, and we have a special guest, Mr. Mark Graalman from Sanctus Real. How you doing today, Mark?
Hey, I'm doing very good.
Did I butcher that last name?
No, actually, you nailed it.
So here's what I learned in public speaking. If you can't pronounce someone's last name, you go, Mr. Mark Graalman, and you say it really fast and you mumble it. No one knows what you said. I actually learned that from a Twix commercial, but that's either near or there.
I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed that you got that the first time, because Mike is known for butchering first names. Yeah. Never mind the last name. So
listen, I had a meeting today and someone goes to me. I had a meeting with a bunch of it was like 20 people, Zoom meeting. Person goes to me, do you know who I am? I'm like, yep, absolutely. Looked at the name Ingrid. Got it right. Boom. 2 points for me.
That's amazing. Well,
thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's been a crazy year for everybody, and to our benefit, a lot of bands want to talk to people. So we're happy that you're here. But just to give a little background for people who are watching and will watch, you are the drummer from Sanctus Real, but you do a bunch of other things too. You're a father, you're a husband, and you are a youth pastor, I think, still. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Nice. So, and you are out of Ohio. But for people who don't know, you actually have been in the band since it started back in 1996. Does that make you feel old? 1996 still?
Yeah, we're finally getting to that stage where it's kind of like, the little debate instantly goes off in your brain when people ask, how long has your band been around? You're tempted to lie.
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, let's get into it a little bit here. So where did you grow up? How did you get into music in the first place? Never mind Sanctus Real. How did you start getting into music?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, it's a little mysterious even. I don't really know what triggered this for me as a kid, but when I was about 10 years old, I started just kind of telling my parents and everyone that I was going to play the drums. And I don't really know why. Like, I had an uncle who, well, I still have that uncle, but he played drums for I don't know, just a short amount of time. So I remember going to my grandma's house one time. There was a drum set in the garage, and, I watched him play it for a little bit, and he let me bang on it for a minute. And, that's the only time I can remember being around drums even. But I always loved music. I grew up listening to a lot of, my dad listened to all sorts of classic rock stuff, so as a kid, it was, CCR and Led Zeppelin and, all these classic rock bands that I was way into, Deep Purple, stuff like that. I was hearing my parents play. Just for whatever reason, I just always gravitated towards the rhythmic side of music and just always loved it. So yeah, started taking drum lessons when I was about 12, and now I'm 30 years older than that and still playing.
So you're 32. You're just kidding.
Plus a decade, yeah.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. So you started with the classic rock, like Led Zeppelin and things of that nature. When did you start getting into the Christian side of the music?
So that, for me, happened when I was about 16. It really coincides with when I came to know the Lord. My family, we started going back to church when I was almost 16. It was really just kind of an interesting time period because like I said, I grew up listening to music all the time and had already been playing drums for a while there at that point. And the church that we started attending, you know, was a real kind of contemporary style church. There was like a modern style worship band that played every Sunday with a drummer and whatnot. And so, and then I just kind of discovered this whole thing of Christian music. Like I literally didn't know it existed. You know, I think I had heard of Striper, but that was it. You know,
yeah. Who are you listening to? Well, you're 16 years old. You just go back to church. Who are you listening to right now, or back then?
Back then, so so a lot of the kids in the church youth group, they were all into what I guess would have been at that time. You know, again, this being like 1993.
Yeah.
Kind of the popular Christian bands at that time were like the Newsboys and Audio Adrenaline, the real Audio Adrenaline, the original Audio Adrenaline. DC Talk obviously was a big one, and just all those Stephen Curtis Chapman, all those iconic Christian artists that kind of started the whole CCM thing, or at least took it to a whole nother level in that mid 90s era. But I kind of, I was always kind of the fringy rock and roll kid. So, I got introduced to Christian music through that, but then I started to discover like more of the underground, I guess, kind of Christian rock scene. And I started getting into bands like now my mind's going blank. Like the Prayer Chain was a big one for me, and Poor Old Lou.
Prayer Chain was fantastic.
Oh, they were excellent.
Do you remember the intro? I can't. I'm not even gonna do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, see, but you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we have one guy named Danny who goes DC Talk. One guy just typed in and goes DC Talk with exclamation points.
Yeah, DC Talk is still, I feel like there's still a big deal, to those who know, and they're kind of legendary to those who were maybe too young at that point when they were on their game. But they're still, they did a couple of cruise ship things and sold them out. It's like everybody loves DC Talk.
DC Talk's one of those bands where if they ever got back together, they would easily sell 500,000 copies. Not even a question. They're one of those bands that just resonate with people. Yeah,
they definitely, God did something pretty special through those guys when they were kicking around.
So I'm gonna get my music geekness out of here. So I'm gonna get it out of the way here. So you like the Prayer Chain. Who else was those underground rock groups that you were into back then?
Oh man, Johnny Q. Public. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That was a favorite of mine. I'll bet I saw those guys live probably 10 or 12 times.
They were actually on Goatee Records for one album back in the day. Before it was actually their last album.
Yeah. Yep. Plank Eye was a big one for me. I love Plank Eye.
They actually released quite a bit of albums on Tooth and Nail.
Yeah, they hung in there quite a while. Man, I'm trying to think. Starflyer 59 was a big one.
They've been around for years.
Yeah. Actually, I think he's still doing it, isn't he?
He is, and actually the brother, Jason Martin, is actually a pastor now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's a pastor.
Cool.
And he actually had the side project Joy Electric. Remember that back in the day?
They were great. Yeah,
that was their project.
Yep.
They
I
actually
didn't do it till later, but
Joy Electric actually did a remix of a Sanctus song way early on.
Really?
There's a version on our first record that we released in 2002, Say It Loud record. There was a song on there called Inspiration, and I don't know if you'd even be able to find it at this point, but there is a Joy Electric remix version of Inspiration out there somewhere.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Ohio. So are you? That's where you
did.
Started, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's where Sanctus Real started. So how did that opportunity come about? And how did you end up, finding these guys?
Yeah. Basically what happened was, the church that I grew up in, every kid in that church. It wasn't a huge church by any means, but like every kid that was there was either homeschooled or they went to the local Christian high school, Toledo Christian. Except for me. Me and my sisters, we were the only ones that were like public school kids there at our church. And so all the other original members of the band went to Toledo Christian School. And so I had all these mutual friends with these guys. We all grew up at different churches, but they all went to the same school together. They started leading worship for the chapel band for the school. And then that kind of led to them getting together after school and basically jamming. And our guitar player, Chris Roman, was over at his house in the basement, his parents' basement. Just they would get together and they would learn what was cool on the alternative rock station at that time. So it was a lot of like Weezer, Foo Fighters, all these, early kind of alternative rock stuff. And I got invited to go and just jam with them in the basement one time. And but they were already kind of a band. They had a guy who was singing in the band, and our original lead singer, Matt Hammett, was actually the drummer of their original band.
Nice.
And he was a pretty crappy drummer, but he was their drummer. I can say that now. But yeah, so long story short, they ended up parting ways with the guy that was singing in the band at that time. And Matt wanted to sing because he was a great singer. And so then they needed a drummer, and I got asked to kind of fill that role. And so
nice.
And then, it was originally their band was called Hello, My Name Is. And then when I got involved.
Was that an ode to an Eminem song?
That might have been too early.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was too early, but that'd be a better story. I don't know that there is a story about that name.
Hey, listen, we got a question from Daniel Gibson. He writes, Sanctus Real's cover of A Beautiful Day. He goes, I guess his band covered it as well. Let's see, how excited were you to get to cover a U2 song for charity?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, I love that this guy is going way back like that. It's awesome to even know about that. Dude, we were stoked when we got the call to be a part of that. The project, it was a project called In the Name of Love, Artists United for Africa. And it was just all contemporary Christian artists covering U2 songs, but all the proceeds was going to help fight AIDS in Africa. Mm-hmm. And it was an honor and a privilege. That happened right after we had put out our first record, the Say It Loud record. And, we released a couple singles off that. And then we were getting ready to do the next record. And we were, talking with the label about what producer to use and whatnot. And so they were curious about us working with a producer named Ted T, who's, he's worked on all sorts of stuff. Most recently, he's probably most known for King and Country stuff he's worked on. But at that time, he had just finished doing like a Delirious record that we all really loved and stuff. And so anyways, so the idea was thrown out, like, let's see if Ted would be willing to do this cover song with them and see what happens from there. And so, we ended up getting to record Beautiful Day with Ted T, and it, we were really happy with how it came out. And then that led to us getting to record our second record with him, which was called Fight the Tide, which to this day, that's still kind of this one where we still get people that come to shows and they're like, oh man, when I was in high school, Fight the Tide, that was my favorite record. That was my jam. Kind of became this little cult classic, I think, for early Sanctus fans.
Yeah. Well, Danny says it was an awesome track, and he actually likes your version better than the original.
Oh man, Danny's way too nice. Thank you, Danny.
So I actually came in. I think it was on Say It Loud as well. No, was it Fight the Tide? Because I think you guys had a song off of that, Everything About You, that ended up on an X album at some point. So as everybody that's been on this podcast so far, I've discovered you guys through the X albums. That was like my thing. Every year I loved them when they came out. I got the DVDs and everything. And so I had heard that. And then I got to see you guys at the DCLA conference in 2006, I think it was. And
crazy.
you guys played. It was in this huge place. I don't even know where we were, but it was like Crowder was there, and I think Super Chick was there, and Jeremy Camp in his big pink T-shirt and in huge muscles. And then we saw you guys. It was like a breakout session, and you guys played this awesome show, and we had got there first, so we were like legit, like right on the gate, which for me at that age, I hadn't been to too many concerts that close. But I got a picture somewhere. I'll send it to you if I can find it. But I got a picture of you guys on stage in 2006. But in saying that, you guys released a bunch of independent albums prior to your signing with Sparrow. Tell us a little bit about your decision to sign with Sparrow. How did that come around? And that was, I think, in around 2001-ish. So how did that happen? And tell us what you were thinking.
Yeah, well, when we started the band, initially the whole thing was, I'm a couple years older than Matt and Chris, the other two kind of most long-standing guys that were original, and so they were wrapping up high school. I had just finished high school, and I already planned on taking like a year to figure out what I was going to do with my life, kind of thing. And it was kind of always this thing of like, we would love to do this, but who really gets to do this? Like, we'll probably all break up after school's over and go our separate ways to college or whatever. But yeah, lo and behold, it was always like, everything with the band, it was always one opportunity would lead to another, which would lead to another. And, we started recording those indie records at a local studio that we had found about 40 minutes from where we lived that would just charge really low hourly rates. We just record in some guy's garage. And we discovered, the company Disc Makers, and you could like send your indie projects to them, and with some CD art, and you'd get, 2,000 printed copies of your CD back. And we'd book all these little youth group shows all over the Ohio, Michigan, Indiana area, and sell our little indie records, and save up. We'd always, it's one thing I can say early on, we were pretty smart about it, I guess. Like, we were able to put all that money back into making the next record. Everything was always about doing the next thing, and so yeah, just always the progression just continued, and the fan base continued to grow. And before we knew it, we were, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into it, and we started getting some attention from people at record labels and whatnot. There was starting to get interest from Nashville. A big help to us was the local Christian radio station here in Toledo. The station here called Yes FM, that's been here for, goodness, I don't even know, probably pushing close to 30 years now. But so they were the ones who were bringing in a lot of the Christian artists to do concerts to our town, to Toledo. And so through that connection, we were able to get a lot of opportunities to open up for these artists. And, we would always go and hang out with them as much as we could, without being the annoying young band, the annoying local artist. And, but we'd always be trying to, get in with them and learn from them, talk to them. And of course, always passing them our indie CDs, and, hoping that they would listen, that somebody would catch an earful of something that they like. So yeah, eventually what happened was we made a connection with a producer named Skid Mills, who was based in Memphis, Tennessee at that time, through some other friends of ours that were signed to a small label and had done a record with him. They had passed along one of our CDs to Skid, and Skid liked it. And he reached out to us actually and said, "Hey, if you ever want to like produce something that's a little more professional, hit me up. I would love to work with you guys." And so we did it. We went down and ended up recording what turned out to be our last indie record with Skid Mills, and we called that record Nothing to Lose. And Chris and I, after that record was completed, we went to Nashville during GMA week, which is something that doesn't really exist anymore, but it used to be when they would have the Dove Awards, it would be kind of the grand finale. But the week prior to that, everybody would be in Nashville. Anybody who had anything to do with Christian music in any way pretty much would be down there for the whole week. It was like a big convention. And so we went there with, we had no credentials. We had no tickets to get into anything, but we had 2 backpacks full of this record. And, we were those guys standing on the street corners, passing out our CD to everybody who had a GMA badge on. And 2 weeks later, we got a phone call. Got a bunch of phone calls, actually, which was pretty cool. But one guy named Chris York from Sparrow Records. And that's what got that ball rolling.
Now, did you realize the awesomeness of Sparrow, like signing to Sparrow Records? Like, Sparrow Records has a long history of great Christian artists, like classic artists. Like back in the day, they had Newsboys, they had Earthsuit, they had Stephen Curtis Chapman, which they still do. They had
Jump 5.
Yeah, they had the original John Michael Talbot. They had Matthew West. They had Phil Keggy. They had so many great artists that, what it reminds me of? Who did we have on? Who was on? We were talking to Joey Disciple, and they were talking about somehow Forefront Records came up back in the day. When Forefront Records had like DC Talk, they had Skillet, they had Bleach, and Rebecca St. James, they had DC and all DC Talk, all these great. It's like a historic label. It's the same thing with Sparrow Records. And as Danny says, Earthsuit was killer. All right, Danny. But my question to you is like, what did you realize what you were stepping into?
We did, I think, to a degree in terms of like the artists that they had. And we knew just enough like to know that they were one of the biggest labels in Christian music. Like we knew they were kind of like number 1 or number 2, kind of always them and the other competitor. But I don't know. I don't think we fully realized until once we signed with them and once we just started seeing what the label was capable of and the platform that was really available to us. I think we realized all that stuff in the process of making that first record and the first couple of tours that they were able to get us on that we would have never gotten on our own. That's when it was kind of like, wow, I think we made a good decision here.
That's nice. So 2002, Say It Loud comes out. You're now on a tour in 2003 with Relient K, Supertones, Pillar, John Rubin.
That's an awesome tour, by the way.
It is an amazing lineup, yes.
It was pretty sweet.
So you release Say It Loud, you're touring with Relient K and Pillar and Supertones, and you get married in 2003 as well. So that was a good year for you. How did you guys meet? Tell us a little bit about your 17 years of marriage now, I think it is.
Yeah, man, you've done your homework. Somebody was Googling a lot. Yeah, it's meeting my wife is actually a pretty funny story. So I'm assuming you guys are familiar with Old Navy, the store, right?
Yes.
So when Old Navy came to Toledo, Ohio, back in the day, it was a really big deal because, Toledo's kind of one of those cities that it's not a small town really, but it kind of feels like one. We're kind of the last ones to get everything that all the big towns get, And so Old Navy comes to Toledo. They do this big grand opening sale, or big event. And at the time, this is before the band went full time. What I was doing to pay the bills was I was delivering pizzas for Papa John's. And so Old Navy makes this phone call to Papa John's and orders like 30 pizzas that day as part of their grand opening event. So I'm the day shift guy at that point, and so I've got to go deliver 30 pizzas to Old Navy. I drive down there and pull in the parking lot, go in, deliver the pizzas, and on my way back out of the parking lot, I'm in this line of cars because this place is packed. Like it's Old Navy came to Toledo. It's the biggest deal ever. And I'm in line, and as I'm waiting to be able to pull back out on the road, I notice that there's this little group of people that are going up and knocking on all the car windows. Like, what are these people doing? And as I'm there sitting in line, pulling up to getting ready to exit, this little Asian girl comes up and knocks on my window. And I roll down the window and she's like, "Hi, my name's Susan. I'm with the Vineyard Church and we're trying to show God's love to people in a practical way. Would you like a free can of pop?" And so they're passing out these cans of pop with this sticker on them that, you know, is basically advertising the Vineyard Church in town here. Like, oh, that's cool. So you guys are Christians. And it's like, yeah. And like, oh, I'm a Christian too. That's really cool. Thanks so much. And so I take the pop. I go back to Papa John's. Tell my boss what happened. He's like, we should make them a pizza. So I end up making them pizza and taking it back and giving them a free pizza. Well, lo and behold, a month later, I get a phone call from the worship pastor at the Vineyard Church. And he's new to town. He just got brought on staff there at this church. And he's trying to create this worship night that's all college age focused or whatever he wants to do. Every other Sunday night, this thing, they called it Peace House. And he wanted the whole worship band to be college age people. And he didn't have a college age drummer. And so somebody gave him my name and number. I wasn't a part of the Vineyard Church at that point, but somehow he got my number and calls me and asks me if I'd be willing to play drums for this worship night he was going to do. So sure, I'd love to do that. You know, I travel a little bit, so sometimes I'm out of town, but if I'm in town, I'll do it. So I started going to this church every other Sunday night, and guess who's there? The little Asian girl. And so, yeah, so I, you know, obviously ended up getting to know her, which her name is Susan, by the way, and she's Korean. She's not just a little Asian girl. She's my beautiful Korean princess. And yeah, so it turns out that her best friend was this girl named Stacy, who played bass for the worship team there. And at one point, our bass player in the band, Steve Goodrum, the guy who's on the first couple Sanctus records, he was from Colorado, and he had to go back home for like a weekend, and we had a couple shows over that weekend. And so we actually got Stacy, and because she was there in town, we got her to fill in on bass for us. And so she's coming to these rehearsals, and she's bringing her friend Susan with her. So I just kept running into this girl all over the place. And so, yeah, after a little while, we're hanging out. And then after a little while, we're engaged, and now we've been married 17 years. We got 3 kids.
Well, nice. Congratulations. That is no small feat, 17 years. You know, in 2004, you guys released Fight the Tide, which won that GMA Dove Award for Modern Rock Album of the Year. And then after that, you released The Face of Love, which was another album I got into because, I kind of met you guys around the Everything About You stage. And then The Face of Love was different. The Face of Love, I'm Not All Right, was the major song that became #1 on the contemporary hit radio. And I remember like just the tone of the album was much different than in the past ones, and that was due to a number of background stuff going on in the band, which sadly I think included the death of your father. Am I correct?
Yep, that's right.
So sorry to go down very quickly, but
way to go, RJ!
Yeah.
Way to go!
I didn't plan for the hey, awesome marriage, and now let's talk about this. But the album definitely had a different feel. Tell us a little bit about kind of what you were going through, maybe what the band was going through right as you're writing this next album, and it really did put an impact, which included that Benjamin track too that you had a big part in.
Yeah. That record definitely was very different, I think, mainly due to just everything that was going on, all the internal struggles that were happening within the band. Obviously the most impactful thing for me was just my dad coming down with cancer and passing away, and all that happened kind of abruptly and completely unexpectedly. Basically, we had just wrapped up the Fight the Tide tour that we had done in support of that album, and we're coming off the road to get ready to go into the studio a few weeks after that. But I actually left the tour a couple of days early because my wife and I were pregnant with our firstborn, and he was actually breached in the womb, and so we were going to have a C-section. So the weird thing was, like, we knew, it was scheduled. We knew when our son was going to be born. So I was able to come off the road a couple days early and be with her And so I came home on a Monday, and we were scheduled to have the C-section done on Friday. Well, that Monday, my parents picked me up from the airport, drove me home, and then later that night, I found out the next day. Later that night, my dad just had he just wasn't feeling good all day. He had really bad stomach ache, and but it got so bad that about 2 or 3 in the morning, my mom ended up taking him over to the emergency room. They'd admitted him and started running all these tests and whatnot, and he was there. I found out about all this the next day, and he ended up being there, every day. And it was just interesting because looking back, we were so preoccupied. Obviously my parents were just very like, don't worry about it. He'll be fine. He's, they're just running tests and trying to figure out what's going on, where this pain's coming from. And, we're getting ready to have a baby, which, him being our first, we were just kind of overwhelmed and consumed with that. And well, it got to be Friday, the day that we're supposed to go into the hospital, the same hospital. And we go in to have, the C-section done. And my dad's still in the hospital. He's been there 4 days at this point. And yeah, long story short, we had our son at 3 p.m. And my dad was 1 floor above us in the same hospital. And at 5 o'clock, my sister comes down just weeping and just, tells us that, the results are in, Dad's got cancer. And, just this crazy, just shift of emotions, just literally, I had my first kid, which is my dad's first grandbaby. And then to literally be told a couple hours after that he's got cancer, just sends you right into shock, Mm-hmm. They went through that weekend. He was still there in the hospital. And, that Monday they did an exploratory surgery and just discovered that it was just everywhere, all throughout his entire abdominal cavity. It was already stage 4. And basically they just said, there's nothing we can do. And yeah, 2 months later, he passed away. And I think it was not even a month after that, we went into the studio to start tracking the next record, which is Face of Love. So as you can imagine, going into the studio, we were just carrying that burden. It was like all these first time things were happening. We, within the relationships of the band, I was the first one to have a kid. I was also the first one to lose a parent, and our manager at the time, he and his wife were going through a divorce. The guy who, Steve Gooder, I mentioned him earlier, he was, part of the band for the first couple records. And, he was in the band for a few years before we signed the record deal. He ended up leaving the band. And shortly thereafter, he and his wife went through a split up. And, just all this heavy stuff. It just felt like the world that we knew was just crumbling. And as a result of all that, as you say, not to bring it all down, but that's where we were at that point. And that's why that record, if you compare it to either of the first 2 records, it's just, it's definitely got a darker tone. It's way more heavy lyrically and musically. It's just, it's a very soul searching record and very crying out to God, like, God, this ain't no joke. What is going on? That's kind of where we were at.
I think that speaks a lot to a band that can not just sing songs in one fashion or one tone. You guys were going through stuff, and it shows in your music, which means that you're writing based on how you're feeling. I'm Not All Right is probably one of my favorite Sanctus Real songs, and it's super powerful, and it's even in its emotion, not even just lyrically. And then Benjamin, the track, that kind of talks about that situation that you were just talking about, where it literally says, children born while fathers die. It's that circle of life that we all live in time. Just very different, from the past. But I think, again, it's showing you guys are going through this stuff, and you're not afraid to write about it. It doesn't always have to be a shine, Jesus, shine moment. Happy go lucky. It's like, stuff's going on, let's talk about it. So I thought that was really cool.
So I have a question for you. So when writing these songs, as a Christian artist, a lot of Christian artists, especially the ones who are definitely more ministry oriented, worship oriented. Where do you do when you're going through those times and you're like, I just need to write a song for me right now? Like, you know that you're here to write music to spread the gospel, but then all of a sudden you're going through a lot of crap and you're like, I just need to write this song for me because I need to get this off my chest.
Yeah, I think that's something that when we started the band, and really kind of ties back even to the name of the band. We used the word real because that was our desire as a band, to be real, to just be very transparent. And
Yeah.
I think that was something that we saw too much of in Christian music and in the church in general, especially during that time period, that it was like everybody, there was so much pressure to perform. In a sense, there was more legalism than what anybody was admitting to. I think there was just a lot of facade. Everybody kind of wanted to look like they're some kind of spiritual giant, and never coming out and saying that, but there was always, nobody's ever admitting their weaknesses. It was just like, I think I don't know, there was just something that was in our DNA from the beginning of the band. Just, let's allow people to see our weaknesses, because that's where God's strength is made perfect. And that's what, that's what we all really need. It's confession that brings healing, not pride,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think, for whatever reason, that was just kind of the way that always made sense to us. We obviously love the songs that are just pump you up and are just straight ahead, powerfully encouraging and whatnot. But I don't know, sometimes we draw just as much encouragement from, being willing to ask the question why and stuff like that, because I think God's big enough to handle that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got a question from one of the fans. It says, "What's God's teaching? What is something God is teaching you right now?"
Oh man, I feel like what I've been learning more and more of the last couple of years. I feel like I tend to go through these long seasons where the Lord speaks to just certain things, for me. And right now, I'm in just this. If I had to name the season I'm in, it's intimacy, which sounds really like almost like something you shouldn't talk about. Just intimacy in the Lord. I just feel like God's been showing me so much the past couple of years, especially just how important it is to really set aside time for Him. And, growing up as a church kid, a youth group kid or whatever, it's like you were always taught to, do your devotionals daily and, that kind of thing or whatever. But I think I'm realizing more and more the importance of just being willing to sit and just be still, as the scripture says, just literally be quiet and let the Holy Spirit speak to you. And, just spending time in His presence, even in, not necessarily laying out your long laundry list of, God, please do this and please do that and protect me from this and protect me from that, but just the importance of the fact that he wants to be like our loving Father, who any dad will tell you, the best times are when your kid cuddles up with you on the couch and just wants to sit there and watch a movie with you, or whatever, it's like that time in each other's presence. I feel like that's what the Lord's been showing me. And I feel like what I'm learning from that is that time, that presence does way more than my blabbering mouth of prayer requests could ever do. It's like that changes me from the inside out when I just spend time in His presence like that.
I'm at a men's Bible study on Monday nights, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. when we pray, like what are we praying about? 9 out of 10 times, unfortunately, we pray about what can you do for me? Instead of we should be
Mhm.
praying like, God, what can I do for you? Like the
Yeah,
verse in Matthew,
yeah.
it says, for Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. That's the one verse I love telling my kids, because we live in such a society and such a life now where it's like, well, what are you going to do for me? Our life
Mm,
as Christians should be, especially when we're coming into prayer. And I'm guilty of this when I say this, and I'm learning this now. It's like, what can I do for you? And
mhm.
it just
Yeah.
makes sense what you're saying. It's like sometimes we just need to stop talking. Sometimes we need just to listen. Sometimes we need just to be like, God, whatever you want to do with me, just do it, and I'm going to follow. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
times we get so stuck in the mindset of, um, I need to know what God's plan is. I need to understand it right now. It's like, no, no, no. You need to be still and trust God's plan. Not because you're right now, you might not understand it, but your job is just to sit still and just trust what's going on at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Absolutely.
you come out with "I'm Not All Right." You come out with that "Face of Love," and now you get into "Pieces of a Real Heart," which uh, has become. And I'm gonna say this maybe personally, but I think the majority of Sanctus Real fans know the song "Lead Me." That seems to be
Mhm.
the cultural phenomenon that it is today. It's become an anthem, I think, for fathers and families. And so you guys had one direction where you were doing I'm not all right, and now it's "Lead Me," which is in another direction, but it's both being honest, both being really raw. And how has let's ask this as a two-part question with "Lead Me." How has your father and then how has you being a father changed your perspective in life in general and your music?
Wow. Yeah. um, that's a great question. I think, yeah, it's funny that song "Lead Me." It came out of our original singer Matt. It came out of a really rough time period for him and his wife, just really struggling in their marriage, and
Hmm,
being brave enough to be that honest about it,
hmm,
uh, which is no easy thing when you got a lot of people watching you.
yeah.
And but it began a journey, I think, for him and his wife especially, but one that we all were kind of on together, like it or not kind of thing. It's like, just part of being in the band together, and just as he was growing and learning in that situation, I think we all were learning from it. And yeah, it's amazing when I think about like my dad and his influence on my life, obviously as a father, and seeing him as a husband. uh it's just amazing, like the things that you'll learn, both from what he would purposely teach me, but even the things that he didn't even know he was teaching me,
Hmm,
things that I picked up from him, just watching how he lived his life. And I think that's the stuff that's most special to me now, is, just remembering the integrity that he had. And, he was a very quiet guy. I can definitely tend to be a quiet, kind of shy guy, especially in a group. I'm more reserved, and, you know, not a big, I'm not always going for attention by any means. And he was even worse than me, definitely strong, silent type kind of guy. But he was the kind of guy that, like, you knew how much he loved you, even if he wasn't the most like explosive in expressing it. He was just that guy that the things he did behind the scenes, for you and whatnot, just would speak volumes. And uh, my wife always tells a story about when I was on the road, touring and stuff, and she was pregnant with our son Ben. Uh, it was like multiple times throughout the winter, she would just randomly hear like the sidewalk scraping, and she'd go and look out, and my dad would be at her house shoveling the snow off and icing the sidewalks and get everything cleaned up for her, because I'm out of town that weekend and she's got to go somewhere, whatever, and she's pregnant. And, it's like that's just the kind of stuff that he would do. And
That's awesome.
that influences me tremendously. Is like, this is how you serve your wife and your kids. This is how you love them, and take care of them. And it doesn't matter if you get a pat on the back about it or not. It's like, even if nobody knows, this is what you do. And so yeah, so that stuff was huge for me, and influencing just how to love your wife well, and love your kids well and whatnot.
So I have a question from the peanut gallery here. It says, I think he means "Lead Me" is my favorite song from you guys. It helped me, my wife, and I go through some really tough times. That said, what is your favorite style of music to play? So many artists fall into this style to make a living, but it may not be their passion. If you could tour successfully doing a different style, what would it be? Many questions in that one, he says. No kidding. We love Danny.
Wow. Danny, I appreciate you so much. Danny Gibson, my best friend that I've never met. At least I don't think I have. Maybe he's come to a show. Maybe I've met him. I don't know. Wow. Yeah. That is a tricky question. And I love that you asked that about Lead Me, because if I'm honest, let's be honest, Lead Me led into a whole realm of things for our band that, we never had to deal with prior to that. And that was, what kind of band are we going to be now? Because it's pretty obvious when you look at our discography, that we weren't the same band by the end of the Matt Hammett era that we were when we began. It was definitely a rock band that morphed into a much more CCM friendly thing. And part of that was definitely due to the success of Lead Me. And that was the first song that we ever got played on AC radio, adult contemporary radio. And what happens as a result in terms of the popularity of the band, how many records you sell, how much your financial situation improves when you have an AC single that hits big. It's a night and day difference. And after you experience that, it's like it can turn into a wrestling match real quick. Like, do we want to continue being what we've always been known for, or do we need to go more this way, because this clearly is working better than what we were doing before in terms of being able to move forward and grow. You add in the pressures of now we're all married, and now we've all got kids, and now we've got mortgages to pay for. And it's like real quick, everything can change. And if I'm honest, I think that's where, motives start getting sticky, and outside influences start coming in. And I could ramble for hours and turn your head all sorts of ways. But to get back to Dan's question, I'll say this: I have loved every. I almost feel like there's different versions of Sanctus Real at this point. There's so many versions, so many parts of our journey as a band, and I've honestly loved every bit of it. I've loved, when we were basically trying to be the Weezer meets the Foo Fighters kind of rock and roll thing when we put out our first 2 records. I loved that time period. I loved playing drums to those songs the way that we played them. But as things got a little more mature sounding, maybe, and as we grew up a little bit more, like I love stuff like John Mayer's Continuum record with Steve Jordan playing drums on the whole thing. Like, I love that record. And the fact that some of our mid-era stuff, I guess, gave me the opportunity to be able to play drums like that to songs that were a little more that kind of feel. Like, I loved that. I love what we're doing now with our new singer, Dustin Lally. Stuff that's a little more anthemic and worshipful. It's all of it has just a special place in my heart. I will say, though, if I could do a totally different style of music and have success doing that, this might sound a little crazy, Dan, but I'm gonna throw it out there to you.
Let me grab out of my desk. I feel this is gonna be a big bomb right here. I'm holding.
It might not be that crazy, but I would play in a funk band, like right now, I love
Really?
funk music. Yes.
Nice.
Anything with like that kind of R&B, jazzy, funky groove, big fat drum and bass groove.
Did you like
I love that stuff.
Incubus back in the day?
You know, I did like a handful of their songs. I can't say that I was like a diehard fan. I never
Because they had
bought
a
all their
little bit of
records.
alternative funk style to their music a little bit.
Yeah, their drummer was great. For
But I will
sure.
tell you this: I definitely can. I understand where you come from, and I have my own business, and I'm a photographer. And when I first got into photography, I'm like, I'm going to be a music artist. I'm going to move down to Nashville, take pictures of artists, and then
Yeah.
I realized I want to have a family and support a family.
Uh-huh.
So the kind of photography I do is not the most. It's gratifying, but it's not like I wake up every day and say, how can I make this look better? It's you have a point. There comes to a time in your life you have to decide, do I want to be a poor, starving artist or support a family? And to be honest with you, I think that's kind of what Hawk Nelson did. Hawk Nelson, if you remember, when they first came out, they were a pop punk band. And then they released probably 3 or 4 albums on Tooth and Nail. They were moderately successful, nothing great. But then all of a sudden they released the album, I think it was Diamonds or something like that. So the song Diamond was on it. And it was very much contemporary CCM, K-Love friendly. And all of a sudden they exploded.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, you guys definitely went through a number of phases, or as you said, maturing through your sound. You come out with a couple more albums after that, Run and The Dream. And now it's been 20 years of touring, 24 different radio hits. You guys are a huge name in Christian music by 2016. And then your lead singer decides to move on. And tell us a little bit about that decision. How did you come to hear about that decision? And then, if you can, how does the new singer come into this? And was that just easy, or was there a process there?
Yes, and yes. Yeah. So, I guess we came to know where Matt was at shortly after we made a record called The Dream that ended up being Matt's last record with us. I think the process of making that record, it was interesting. It was very different in terms of how the process felt for each of us. For me, that was one of the most fun records we ever made. I think for Matt, that was one of the most difficult experiences that he ever had making a record. And I won't go into all the details as to why that is, but basically it was kind of like, I think that may have been like the straw that broke the camel's back. There was so many other things that were going on. The struggles for Matt between during that whole right after Pieces of a Real Heart had come out, was also the season of when Matt and his wife Sarah had found out that their son Bowen was going to be born with half a heart. He had still has a congenital heart disease thing that he was born with, and they found out that he was going to be born that way even when he was only like 4 months in the womb. So that's a whole nother. It was just crazy how prophetic that whole record ended up being. There were so many songs that contained the word heart, and just so many. The record, we named it Pieces of a Real Heart, and all these things that were those songs were all written. That record was all recorded. Everything was done before they even found this out, and they ended up having a baby who was going to be born with half a heart. And he ended up having 2 open heart surgeries, literally within a couple weeks' time after his birth. And then just recently had his 3rd one to change the way his heart worked so that he could live, which he's actually, just for the record, he's really doing great. And he's 10 years old now, and he's an amazing kid, like an awesome young man. And I'm so thankful for what God has done in their family. But the reality for Matt was he had already been dealing with some home life issues, which is where that song "Lead Me" came from. And now they've got a sick kid at home, and so every day he's leaving home, going out on the road with us, fully realizing that he's got a kid at home that it's quite possible might not live the very longest of lives, and he's like constantly dealing with that. Like, here I'm leaving the son at home that I don't know how much time I have with him. So the pressure of that just builds and builds and builds, and then we go through the typical stresses of writing a record, making a record, going out and touring, writing another record, making a record, going out and touring. And just there was many other difficulties between some things we were dealing with on the label side, some things we were dealing with producer we were working with at the time, and stuff that just really just put Matt in the place where he finally was just like, I can't do this anymore. I need to be done. And, it started off initially as he wanted to take a break. And, this tail end of 2015, we were wrapping up a tour. And he was like, man, I just think I just need to just stop, for real, just stop for a solid 3 or 4 months. And of course, the first thing that's always on our minds, being Chris and I, was, okay, that's totally cool. And we get it. We'd love to do that too. But how do we pay the bills for 3 or 4 months if we're not playing any shows, and obviously our conversation was more gracious than that with one another, but that's where everybody's heads is at. It's like, it's not that easy. And the conversations, just evolved over a few weeks of time, and it just really, after, praying too, and just asking God for direction, he just really felt like he was supposed to be done. So yeah, I guess that's the first half of the question. The second half is kind of looking at the results of that for Chris and I. It's like, obviously that left us in the position of okay, well, if Matt's done, that's fine for him, but what does that mean for us? What are we going to do? Obviously, again, we're all in this together. We've all got mouths to feed. It's like, this is our living. It wasn't just something we were doing for fun. So yeah, it was kind of a shocking situation. One of those things that, like I said, there were so many things that I think we all kind of saw building up, particularly for Matt, that it wasn't like a shock when it came, but it wasn't really expected either. So, initially, we had made our plans for doing that fall tour at the end of 2015, having that be Matt's kind of farewell tour and whatnot. Leading up to that, a month or so out, before the tour started, Chris and I are just talking through and just praying about whether or not we should try to continue. And to Chris's credit, he really was the guy who had way more faith than I did. Initially, he was the one who was really like, man, I feel like we're called to this, and I feel like I want to keep going. I want to try. I want to give it a shot. And in my mind, I'm thinking man, I think I was really wrestling with a lot of emotions over just the fact that Matt was leaving. It's like losing I mean, we were friends since we were they were 16, I was 18, and so it's like we literally spent more than half our lives together at that point. So it was very difficult to realize that one of my closest friends is leaving this thing that we've built together, and the thing that we built together is probably falling apart. In my mind, I'm thinking how is this going to possibly work without Matt? Obviously he's the lead singer, front man. He was always our main songwriter. Most of the songs that were written, he wrote. And so yeah, it was just really this isn't going to work without him. How's this going to work? But Chris had the guts to say, I want to try. I initially told Chris, all right, tell you what, I will help you try. I'll help you try to get this thing back off the ground. But I think, man, once it gets going again, I don't want to promise you that I'm going to stick around. I don't know that I want to continue, you know, because again, I was burnt out on the road life and all that, and the never ending story of the cycle of what it is to be in a band. You know, I was pretty weary from it as well. And, you know, with Matt leaving, I was hurt in a lot of ways, you know, not that he did anything wrong to me, but it would just hurt losing him, and just hurt seeing this thing unravel. And so, yeah, I initially told Chris, I didn't think I even wanted to continue. You know, I would help him get it back up and running, but after that I was out. And as we started praying about it, and especially for myself, as I finally started actually praying about it and asking God, what's your plan in this? You know, what is this? Is there anything to this? You know, one of the things that Chris and I agreed on was, let's not do the whole, you know, throw it out there and open it up to the whole world. You know, we're looking for a new singer kind of thing. You know, we had done that before, replacing a bass player or a guitar player, you know, and over the years we'd experienced that. But with the lead singer, frontman, the guy who gets to have the mic in his hands all the time, it was just a little heavier this time around. And just like, we're not going to do the YouTube video audition thing, you know? And so we literally just started praying, God, if you want this to continue, you please just bring the right person to us. Please just drop the right guy in our laps. You know, and as ridiculous as that kind of sounds, but then lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So the guy who was playing bass guitar for us during that period, a guy named Jacob Rye, who's a producer actually out of Michigan, who had been a friend of ours, and he was playing bass at that point in the band for maybe 3 or 4 years at that point. He had ran into a friend in his hometown of Adrian, Michigan, at a little Chinese restaurant there that he goes to. And his buddy was like, hey, I heard what's happening with the band, heard about Matt leaving. Are you guys looking for a singer? And, you know, and he was like, well, yeah, kind of, but I don't know. It's all kind of up in the air. And he's like, well, have you thought about Dustin Lally? And so this Dustin Lally guy was a guy who was in a band that Jake had produced like 4 or 5 years prior to this. Or actually, I think it was like 6 or 7 years. It was quite a while. And just a local band out of Michigan that Jake had worked with at one point. He's like, no, I haven't talked to Dustin in years. He said, I think you should give him a call. And so he starts kind of researching this a little bit, comes across this music by this group called what do they call it? Oh, James and June. The name was slipping my attention there. James and June was what they called it. Obviously, his name is Dustin. His wife's name is Sarah. But they did this folk duo that they called James and June together, and they made a record with somebody. And Jake somehow found this record online and like brought it to Chris and I and played it for us. So, hey, I know this guy, and what do you think of this? And we listened to this music, and we're just like, this is like really good. Like it was. If you know, if anybody wants to find something obscure, go look up James and June. It sounds like the Civil Wars or something like that. Like it's nice. Just really, they're great, and we were impressed by it. You know, just like, man, this guy's got a killer voice. Like, do you think he'd be interested? And you know, so Jake reaches out to him, and it turns out he's, you know, him and his wife have just been leading worship in a couple different churches for like the last 10, 15 years or something. It's just what the guy's always done, working at churches, being worship pastor and associate pastor at a couple churches. And but they were in a season where they were looking, just feeling like, I think our time here's up, and they were just looking for something different, which, you know, they kind of assumed like probably going to get called to a different church or something. So we reached out to him and just ended up getting together for dinner with him one night and just met him and hung out with him for a bit, and ended up inviting him to come over to Chris's house and try writing some songs together. And just the whole process was so organic and so natural and so easy. It's like, here's this guy with this killer voice, he's got a great heart for ministry, has experience in ministry. And he's our age. He's, got a wife and at that time 3 kids. Now he's got 4. But, he was just at the same place in life and was at a place where he was available. And it's like, how in the world does all this stuff line up? And it happens to be a guy who lives 40 minutes down the road from us, and it's just like, it was just amazing. So yeah, quite literally God just dropped the right guy in our laps. And now here we are, at this point, he's been in the band. It's, we're on our 6th year with him, and 2 records and 1 EP later.
That's crazy. Yeah. I fell off in the last couple of years of listening to, a lot of music. And it was on the radio. We heard Unstoppable God, which my kids were actually listening to. So if this tells you how long you've been around, I came across you, and then my kids came across you just recently, and they're singing the song in the car, and I'm like, this is a really good song. And I looked it up later, and I was like, this isn't Sanctus Real, because that's not that dude's voice. And I looked up, and that's when I heard the story. But I was like, not a lot of bands have been able to successfully manage changing their lead singer. I mean, it happens a lot and I don't mean to say that the people in the background are any less important, because sometimes when guitarists leave or drummers leave, the sound changes. But the lead singer to leave is usually a death sentence for a lot of bands. And your band seems to have been thriving since then. And it's just a different sound. It's not like, oh, this is way better than that. It's just a progression. And it seems to have continued to grow and mature. And so Sanctus Real is still Sanctus Real. It's just you continue to mature. And now with this new singer, it doesn't seem to have skipped a beat. And it seems as though the reviews say the same across the last 3 albums or so that you guys put out with that EP. We are coming up on the hour mark here, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. This year has been crazy for us, for everybody. Is there any projects that you have coming up? Any things that you're excited for in the new year?
Yeah, actually, we're in a really exciting season right now. Lots of new music, lots of stuff has been written. We've begun recording the new record, and are trying to make a kind of big decision about the new single that's going to be coming out to Christian radio pretty soon here. Yeah, just lots of new, and hopefully we'll get to tour again sometime soon.
Yeah, gosh, I haven't been to a concert in a while. I'm excited to get back out there.
Yeah.
But again, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like there's so much more we need to talk about. So in the future, if you're ever bored again and you want to come on, we will definitely have a round 2.
Round 2, my friend.
All right, I'm ready. I love it.
But thank you again for joining us. Thank you guys for hanging out with us and listening in. If you can stay on after we go off live, we'll just end things and that's it. But thank you guys for joining the 4-7 podcast, and everybody have a great night.